Hi, welcome to Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a LGBTQ and literary perspective from two boys who are trying to put their English literature degrees to some use. My name is Joel and your name is...
Brian, hi.
Hi, and this week we're going to be discussing the episode, I'm going to get this correct, Out of Mind, Out of Sight, which is episode 11 of season 1 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You know, I think it's very understandable that I got the number of that episode wrong because it's been so long since we recorded our last episode. How could I possibly remember?
Yeah, it's been approximately 14 hours maybe.
About 14 hours. So, Brian, this episode, who wrote and directed this episode?
Yeah, sure. So this was written by Joss Whedon, Ashley Gable and Thomas A. Swidden, and it was directed by Reza Bodiyi. Bodiyi. That's an Iranian name. I actually have a bit of information about him if you want to hear it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so he's a pretty prolific TV director from the 60s onwards, and he died in 2011, unfortunately. He directed 5 episodes of DS9.
So, Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
Any good episodes?
Dunno. Civil Defense, Past Tense Part 1.
Oh, yeah.
Life Support, Visionary, and Paradise Lost.
They're actually all like acclaimed episodes for the most part. Yeah, genuinely.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, and it first aired on May 19th, 1997, this episode.
Cool.
Yep, so there you go.
Okay, so this is the episode. This is the one with the invisible girl who is Clea Duvall and who ends up being a United States assassin at the end of the episode in a bit of a twist. So, Brian, do you want to give us a quick overview of what happened in this episode?
Oh, do you want me to give the summary?
Yeah, give us a summary there.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Hit us up with those sums. Whatever happened to that thing where people try to abbreviate everything? Or try to abbreviate everything? Like hit us with that sums?
Yeah, true. Okay. Mysterious attacks on the popular culminate in an attempt to disfigure Cordelia. Marcy, a nondescript schoolgirl, has been ignored so long she became invisible. Buffy defeats her and Marcy is abducted to become a government assassin. That's all true.
That's pretty succinct, to be honest.
It's not very useful, though.
No, so in terms of, like, there's some other stuff that happens in this episode, so I'll give you a quick rundown of kind of the key scenes. So, yeah, the thoroughfare, the backbone of this episode is Clea Duvall is ignored by the popular girls who are called the Cordettes, which is actually something that I've forgotten. And she becomes invisible and then over several months hides like a rat in the ceiling and starts stalking people and beating them up and all this kind of stuff. So you have various scenes of Cordelia's boyfriend being attacked in the shower with a floating baseball bat. You have Harmony Kendall, who gets named for the first time in this episode when Cordelia's friend is pushed down a flight of stairs. And Cordelia, self-centeredly, but not inaccurately, realizes this is an attempt to interrupt her ascension to the throne of May Queen, which is a thing, apparently.
It's where it's like being a mayfly, so you get to have 1 hour of glory and then you get killed.
That's very poignant. What is it? Joss says in this episode, poetic in a maudlin kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
The side plot which they touched there in your summary is, so Angel is in this episode as well, so he helps save Buffy even though Buffy's not really talking to him because he's a vamp. He doesn't
help save Buffy.
He does ultimately, like this is all about he does because we'll get into it in the scene, but he comes to bring the codex and
sure, so he saves Buffy in the next episode, essentially.
Yeah, he's helping the Buffy X. Do you know what I mean? He meets Jaws for the first time. They have a whole flirtation, which we'll get into. And it's another thematic episode. But really what this episode is about is developing Cordelia as starting her arc as a potentially sympathetic character. So, Brian, anything interesting happen in a Buffy/Irish context this week that could be topically discussed? No, okay, let's move on to the next point.
Yeah, so one of the tweets was making the rounds this week, and even the QIwikipedia, which is the QI Elves, the game show, they tweeted it out as well today, but it's essentially that someone was watching one of the Buffy episodes, I can't remember which one, and there's a big mystical text in it, and basically what people realize is that the text in it is actually a bunch of Irish, so Irish language text, and it's describing the disruption to roadworks because of a new bus lane opening in Dublin.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, where would they even have gotten the text of a Dublin bus press release in 1996 or whatever?
It was probably in the noughties, but internet.
Was the internet even invented then, though? Wasn't it all just cyber demons getting jacked in?
It's definitely surprising that there's Irish on the internet in that day and age. But yes, there you go. So that's the big scale.
So we were kind of, I actually think like the Irish, when Irish or Celtic elements are represented in Buffy, they're usually not terrible.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as saying Supernatural when they have the demon Samhain.
Yeah.
Which is
Sound,
which is the Irish equivalent for Halloween, and various butchered versions of Irish. But yeah, there's a little bit of Irishology.
Samhain.
It's painful to listen to.
Yeah.
So this episode is really quite a lot about kind of like very zones in on the high school kind of thing, the teenage experience. And what I was wondering, Brian, is did you have anything along the lines of May Queen, Spring Formal, any kind of school events like that in your school?
Oh, Jesus Christ, no. No, nothing even remotely like that. We barely had a graduation.
Any school events, kind of cleaning the streets, or
in fourth year, one of the things you had to do as part of your business class that you was one of the optional things you could do in fourth year, but everyone had to take it. Was that you had to organize a business, and every year you had to be innovative, and you were all forced to do a disco for like the first, second, and third years for some reason.
Okay.
And what this involved, because it was in Ireland in probably April or May probably, you had to go into the hall, which was a very tiny hall, and you had to get black bin liners and put them on top of like all the windows.
Classic.
To make it look like it was the nighttime. Mm-hmm. And then I remember the teacher, I hated him, the business teacher. He was a real bastard. But
well, a teacher you had in school that you hate, this is unusual.
I had like 2 or 3 I liked.
Yeah, but you don't mention those.
I do. I think. Anyway, so he would come along and he had his own strobe light, and he'd be dancing there, and he'd like hold it up in front of the crowd and like be like using it, and if you don't, he'd have to like you'd always see like watching his clock while he was using it, because he'd been recommended to only use it for like 6 seconds at a time in case
a seizure.
Yeah,
okay.
It was all very funny. That is the closest we had to something like that. What did you have?
Well, I went to a very arcane school, as you well know. I went to a Jesuit school, so yeah, we got a number of weird things.
We had a chapel.
We had both a chapel and an oratory, which is distinct from a chapel, but it's also a different kind of prayer space.
It's where you gave oral sex to the
priests. It is not.
Okay.
Was there any priests? Well, there were priests, but there was actually quite few, quite low on priests. Jesuits are quite a lay order, but anyway.
Quite a lay order.
Quite a lay order. So some of the weird stuff that we did. Oh, I was actually saying this to someone the other day, that I first got on Twitter around 2008, 2009, and it was mostly a small number of people talking about X Factor, but also briefly was people getting into Twitter beefs about who got selected and who didn't get selected for the various religious retreats we got taken on in school. And this was like a big thing. It's like, well, you got on the big retreat, and why didn't I get on the big retreat? And there's people arguing about that, and then Twitter went away for 3 years, and then people came back onto it. So that was one thing. We had a transition year graduation. We had not festivals, but like events where we all learned school chants to sing at the rugby matches. It's like specifically we're gathered together to learn them, various prayer related circles.
So you had a priest telling you to shout about those Blackrock bastards?
Yes, Blackrock being the evil school, the Cobras, the Cobra Kai. So we did have a lot of chants specifically about them. But probably one of the weirder ones is that we didn't have a graduation as such.
They're passing out.
We had a few things, because when you go to a private school, which I went to as a scholarship student, so don't at me, you can't just have one of anything. So we had a graduation ceremony, fair enough, which our parents went to. We had a passing out ceremony, which was distinct, which was when all the younger students at a different ceremony basically saluted us or something, or essentially metaphorically at the very least, as we passed into manhood and out of the school. And then rather than having a Debs, which is what most Irish schools would have as their their end of school ball or whatever, we had a thing the following January after we started college called the Belvedere Ball. And the school I went to was called Belvedere, which all our parents came to, and which alumni could come to as well. So it was a lot of weird arcane school traditions. So I actually think this is more relatable for me than it is for you, this kind of bizarrely intense school ceremony kind of thing.
Would have to agree. Yeah.
So what's your initial impressions of the episode? What's your hot takes?
It was grand. It wasn't great. Apparently, Joss Whedon had a lot of nightmares when he was younger about his hands basically disappearing after having watched Back to the Future.
Yes.
And that inspired this.
And the Under the Sea dance?
Excuse me?
In Back to the Future, the dance where his hands are disappearing. I think it's called the Under the Sea dance.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Do you know you're Back to the Future?
Nope. I don't think it's that good.
Oh, well, let's not start that conversation. But yeah, specifically, the hands disappearing and at a ball like this is specifically a Back to the Future, Robert Zemeckis kind of thing. Yeah.
So yeah, that's what it was grand. It's an odd one for the penultimate episode of the season, because it does have
Is it?
Yeah.
No, it's not. There's 13 episodes, isn't
No,
there?
12. Next one is Prophecy Girl.
Oh, woof. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Apologies.
So it is unusual for a penultimate episode. It should be setting up things in the next episode a little bit more, I think. It does a little bit, obviously, but no, it's kind of lacking in gravitas. And I kind of disagreed with the mythos behind it, to be honest. So the implication that there are students from all around the place this is happening to kind of negates the discussion they're having about how it's a Hellmouth mystical quantum event.
Yeah, so the kind of the summation that there has been a number of teenagers across the country who have become invisible and the United States government were using them as assassins, it does directly contradict what Giles said, which was, hang wave, kind of like, oh, it's the Hellmouth, But I, of course, took particular umbrage with his moment where he's like, God, I'm being so silly. It's clearly not magic. It's clearly quantum mechanics that's happened to this girl, and it was
really tiny mechanics.
It was really painful for me, because he basically implies that if something isn't, it's kind of a misunderstanding of the Schrodinger's cat kind of situation where if something isn't observed, you can't prove that it exists, so therefore she becomes invisible when people ignore her.
Yeah, so that is, I'm not sure if we mentioned that is the implication here, is that essentially because she's been ignored by all the popular people in school and no one cares about her, she has turned invisible. So that's why it's out of mind, out of sight, as opposed to out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, so that doesn't hold up. That's up there with cyber demons and techno-paganism for me. It's like, that you wouldn't write that episode, that line in the reboot, because it just wouldn't hold any water.
You sure wouldn't.
So what do you reckon are kind of the thematic notes that we're hitting here in this episode?
Okay, so one of the things I read during the week by a guy called Mark Field, who wrote a reasonably in-depth Buffy blog back in the day and has published his blog essentially as a book at one point, and I got it on my Kindle years and years ago and it was pretty okay, was he postulates that what's happening here in this episode is mainly that Cordelia is a shadow for Buffy. A shadow personality, essentially. So Jungian shadows being a representation of darker elements of the self that aren't
expressed
integrated.
desires and needs.
Yeah, and that aren't integrated and exist and must be accepted or integrated to become a fuller person, essentially. So with that, the suggestion here is that Buffy has come from being in her LA school where she was so popular, and she has to go to this place where no one knows her, but she's both represented by Marcy, who's the ignored girl, and then Cordelia, who's this May Queen. And Cordelia, throughout the episode, has to basically Buffy has to understand Cordelia, first of all,
to kill her,
and then also has to reject the elements that Marcy represents, which is this kind of selfishness. Yeah, and obviously the huge thing here is the Merchant of Venice reference, which I think was totally out of whack. But anyway. Yeah,
so essentially, we talked last night from our perspective about how the text that they're doing in often English class, it can be evocative of what the themes of the episode are, and what they're doing here is Merchant of Venice. So, we often talk about how a big part of literature and really engaging with these themes and with a lot of discourse is putting your hand up and being very comfortable with saying you don't know something.
Sure.
I don't know anything about Merchant of Venice. I've never read it. I've no context for it. And
okay.
I want to be open about that.
Okay, so The Merchant of Venice is one of Shakespeare's it's one of the more taught of his comedies. It's very dark, actually, in a way, to be honest. And it does deal with some heady themes, but the language in it is actually quite easygoing. So I learned it in secondary school in third year. So that would have been when I was 15, I want to say, and I did it for the junior cert. So the themes of The Merchant of Venice are essentially that this guy Antonio has taken out a loan from a Jewish character called Shylock, Shylock the Jew. And Shylock is a really great character. He only appears in a handful of scenes, but essentially he says, I'll give you this money, but if you can't repay me, I want a pound of your flesh. So
that's the expression, pound of flesh, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a couple of elements there. One is there is a discussion of the kind of the Jewish issue within that, in the sense that Shylock has that great speech about, if you prick us, do we not bleed, etc., etc. And it's like, don't dehumanize people, and if you wrong us, do we not revenge? But there's also then, and like, his character is heavily disparaged by the characters in the play. But there's also an element that, like, Shylock is an unreasonable and aggressive character. So it's a really uneven portrayal of the issue. So it's an odd one. But it's comedy, so it ends up with a bunch of people marrying and some weird dick jokes and stuff in it as well.
Yeah.
Because, it's Shakespeare. Within this context, what we're looking at is essentially a persecuted person, i.e. Marcy, and her seeking revenge is the idea here. There's also like, really heavy implication that the scene in which he wants to disfigure Cordelia relates to the
taking the pound of flesh.
Taking the pound of flesh.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to know what my one reference for this is?
Yeah.
And it's a surface reference, but it's actually kind of related to the shadow concept. Is coming back again to Star Trek. There's the mirror universe in Star Trek, which the average person will remember from Spock wearing the goatee and the evil versions of everyone. It's a really weird concept because everything is evil and it's meant to be an alternate timeline, but it's a direct copy of everything. Anyway, one of the references they often make is in the mirror universe, everything about human history is darker. Earth lost, or not Earth, the West lost the Second World War. Things like Into Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch kills Tom Robinson. It's all darker versions of things, but they always say, but Shakespeare is actually the same. That Merchant of Venice works out the same, and that all these plays tend to work out the same.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
Actually, talking about Shakespeare with that's a funny thing to say because Ulysses has a really great chapter called Oxygen of the Sun, where basically Joyce goes through all of the history of literature and parodies all the different elements or style elements. And the two people he like very specifically leaves out, or maybe it's three. I think he definitely leaves out Shakespeare. There's no Shakespeare part, though there is like there'd be like a pearl poet part and all of this other crap. That because basically, and the implication is there is that like replicating Shakespeare's voice isn't interesting because Shakespeare's so good. Yeah. But I think he also leaves out Ibsen and a couple of other people who are quite notable. But anyway, one really interesting thing here is that this actually called to mind for me very heavily Seven, the movie.
Yes.
Which I think was released before this. But both because Seven has a very, very oblique Merchant of Venice reference, because the first murder they investigate the second murder they investigate is greed, where the guy has been basically ordered to carve off a pound of his own flesh. Yeah. And
is that oblique or is that direct?
Oblique doesn't mean direct, is it?
I think oblique means, we have the same debate about the word obscure, but it's
definitely a very direct reference.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then later on in the movie, a fashion model is made to carve up her own face because of and has to decide to either carve up her own face, he's carved up her face, and she has to decide whether to phone someone to come help her or to take pills, basically, and it's pride or
it has to be pride.
It has to be pride, yeah. So this actually, I thought it was a really odd pair of references to be mirrored in Seven, which I think was out before this, but I'm not certain. This
may be problematic for our Literary Buffy podcast, because when you were talking about Joyce there, it took me a little while to realise you didn't mean Buffy's mother.
I did.
Oh, okay.
Joyce Summers' famous book, Ulysses?
Yeah.
It's widely renowned to be the best book ever written by a fictional character.
Yeah.
Except for the Bible.
Righto. What? Sorry.
Okay, so with Cordelia being Buffy's shadow self, that's quite interesting. The suggestion that Cordelia represents an element of Buffy is less discussed in Buffy studies than, say, Spike. Spike is very, very heavily referenced as being a shadow self of Buffy, and so is Angel.
Faith, I imagine, as well.
Faith, of course. Faith is like a massive...
Actually, like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. Whereas Cordelia is not referenced as it so much, and that's because I think Cordelia becomes a much stronger character as she goes on. Yeah. So here she's featured in the season relatively little, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we rapidly move away in early Buffy from this reference to the fact that Buffy used to be a popular girl, which and just as I'm saying this, I'm thinking is very similar to the origin of Veronica Mars and Veronica Mars as well. Yeah. And as that becomes less relevant, Corey's usefulness as a cipher for that kind of naivete that Buffy used to have is less relevant as well, But
also, just like Charisma Carpenter plays a character so well that, like, when you see scenes like in this episode where she says it's difficult to be so alone when you're surrounded by people, etc., which, very played out trope, but it's good. It also, another Britney reference, I think, because, there's that episode, or that song by Buffy. Sorry, did I say Buffy or Britney?
You said, the first time you said Buffy, but I think we're getting there. Okay. A song by Britney Spears.
So, the song by Britney Spears, Lucky, where she's like, she's so lucky, she's a star, but she cries in her lonely heart thinking. Anyway, it's about how sad it is to be on your own, surrounded by people.
I'm not familiar with it, but I feel like I don't want to hear the original now.
It's great. I actually do think I like a lot of Britney songs, even though I'm not like a fan.
Yeah, I can say, but she's been good art as well.
Yeah, Baby Hit Me One More Time is such a fucking tune. Also, I look this up every 2 or 3 months where I'm like, tried to find out if someone has written about what Hit Me Baby One More Time actually means. Because it was sung by a 16-year-old. Are we talking about like a physical thing,
Well,
or
it's
is
like-
it like a hit me up or a
I think
come with
it's-
me, or it's such a weird, unexplained phenomena.
Well, I think it's one of these things like the lyrics of Grease Lightning. Everyone just mumbles over it, like, you know, straight people's weddings and children's birthday parties, but they're actually quite like obscene, you know. Or like the fact that the time warp from Rocky Horror Picture Show became a thing that just like middle-aged straight people danced to at weddings, you know. So yeah, I think it's just passed into the zeitgeist a little bit.
Sure has.
But I think one of the impressive things Chris McCarpenter does with Corgi, and there's a whole page in my season 1 episode guide to the rehabilitation of Cordelia Chase. So she manages to make her likable. This episode in many ways is about her starting to see the value of people like the Scoobies, but also illustrating that she can see what's happening in Sunnydale. You would think that she was the most oblivious character, but she's very upfront when she needs help. That, oh, you're always around when strange things are happening. You have all these weapons. You're very strong. I thought you might be in a gang. She is in a gang, the Scooby Gang.
The Scooby Gang. Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, did you notice the myriad Scooby references this episode?
As in references to Scooby-Doo or...
Yeah.
Like
Okay, so Willow has a Scooby-Doo t-shirt on. Buffy, and I think I read this somewhere, but Buffy's wearing a necklace, or like that kind of like the neck scarf. Very, very specifically Daphne-esque.
Yeah.
And of course, Sarah Michelle Gellar does go on to play Daphne in
The
movies.
Which is not as funny or as good as it should be, but anyway.
I think it's great. Anyway, but then at one point, Cordelia says something about Wilma, actually. So I was actually thinking it was Wilma, but it's Velma who's in...
Wilma's from Flintstones.
Yeah, good point, actually. Anyway, but then the other one is that Xander at one point goes, can someone say gulp? Which is a Shaggy reference.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's a weird, like, that's like 3, not 2, you know, vague references to Scooby. And that's odd. It was just like, yeah, cool. Is it like it's supposed to be like a reference to like Scooby as a inspiration for this show? Or is it supposed to be that, like, you know, this calling to like the future that they're going to be the Scooby Gang?
Yeah, so I can 100% see that they kind of been very direct with the Scooby references here, and you could interpret that as, you know, this episode is slightly from Cordelia's perspective, and she's seen them kind of, they are just like this investigative team a little bit. It's a bit reductive. But what I think is impressive is with them trying to move Cordelia into a more likable character. By giving her more exposure, they show her doing much more unlikable things. Mm-hmm. And yet she still comes through as sympathetic, even though she says things like at one point, why does this school admit mentals like her?
Ooh.
And just variously, you know, says that she ran over a girl with her bike and the girl didn't appreciate her pain at the trauma of running a girl over.
Yeah, but that's the great thing about Cordelia, is that she never stops being Cordelia while being a great character.
Yeah, then when she's campaigning for the May Queen, she's about to hand something to Buffy and she says, I don't need the loony fringe vote. Like, she really goes in hard on Buffy.
She sure does.
In this episode.
I agree. Actually, one of the things she said there when she's talking to Mitch at the beginning of the episode is, when they're walking through the corridors, is, my eyes are hazel, not blue. What are you, Helen Keller?
Yeah.
Which was a very, like, funny reference for an episode that's all about seeing and hearing.
Yeah, it's all very on the nose. And she also says, you know, she's talking about her dress. Oh, Mitch is going to die. And like the next episode is him getting beaten up with him.
There's a lot of those kind of lines in this show.
But I'll say this early on. No deaths in this episode.
There are no deaths. Yeah.
So
that's 2 in a row.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in the season that I wouldn't have thought when we started off. One is fewer deaths than you might expect. A lot of villains who have been human. Like, again, this episode examines the question, and Clea Duvall actually says at one point, like, well, what are you going to do? Slay me? You know, it really examines this thing. It's like, you can't deal with people in the same way that you do monsters. There's actually been very few vampire-focused episodes in this season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and most shows would take a couple of seasons to be brave enough to be like, let's do some other stuff, just as the majority of the show, you know? I
totally agree. Yeah, no, it's great. Did you notice who got knocked out in this episode?
I did. In my research, I also noticed this as well.
Oh yeah, everyone but Giles.
Everyone but Giles. In a version of the trope, everyone but Giles gets knocked out at some point in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that. And just generally his like protectiveness when they were stuck in, at one point they're stuck in a room that's filled with natural gas, yeah, and he's trying to like save the kids and that stuff. It was quite nice, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like the episode gave this opportunity for, as I mentioned, for him to meet Angel for the first time.
Oh yeah.
They have a nice, even though we both must have seen this coming because we've seen this episode so many times, but Giles is looking at his reflection in the library, his own reflection. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, I thought someone was behind me, and they turned around and Angel's there, and we both went, oh.
Yeah, that genuinely scared me.
Yeah, but kind of establishing that connection between the two of them, or this relationship that they have. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that you and I both felt that their interactions were quite flirty with each other.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, realistically, there's a very good chance that Angel's pretty bisexual.
I think to some degree the canon is that he is. Whatever about him in this show, and we probably textually have to examine him as like a heterosexual character, but canonically he does have bisexual tendencies.
Yeah, sure. And like Ripper as a character, definitely, I think in the 70s would probably have copped off with a couple of lads.
Yeah, so like Rupert Giles in his like younger days by the name of Ripper, I think generally implies he takes a lot from the John Constantine archetype from Hellblazer, and John Constantine's a bisexual magician from London in the 70s, so
there you go. And John Constantine is like textually bisexual, which is great.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
But no, I think I don't think this scene was written as flirtatious. I think the two actors just have a lot of chemistry in the scene. It's a great scene. I loved it.
And also Angel interacts with Giles on a level that Giles can relate to. So he never talks to Buffy about mythology or lore or text or anything like that. But what Giles and Angel talk about is what was it? It was the Perigame Codex and the Tiberius Manifesto and the various books that Giles has been looking for, and that's what gets Giles under the cravat, as it were.
Yeah.
And he eventually brings him his codex that he's looking for, and that's kind of how they bond to some degree.
And that's going to become important in the next episode, right?
Yeah, and specifically like engaging with the fact that they don't really know anything about the Master, and they refer to him as a vampire king, which is quite a rare. Like that's a thing that exists out in, I would be want to say, lesser fantasy out there, and it's not something that is ever really used in a Buffy context.
Yeah, I think it was just an ambiguity when Giles doesn't know any better, basically. It was a great scene, and my favourite line, of course, from it was, "A vampire in love with the Slayer." It's rather poetic in a maudlin sort of way.
Was that your Giles impression?
It actually wasn't. I just dropped the orb accent.
Okay.
It was just me misspeaking.
Just slid into it.
Yeah.
It's good, and there's a lot of weird lore in this. Like at one point, Giles talks about how he knows or he's heard about what it's like when a ghost passes through you, and he floats the suggestion that the baseball bat that attacked Mitch could have been possessed. Which is like a whole other episode potentially.
And actually, when he said the thing about the poltergeists, I was thinking, is there ever a poltergeist episode in this show?
Like explicitly a straight up and down poltergeist that is just a ghost that's been disturbed? I don't think so. There's few. Yeah, there's not a lot of references to ghosts in the show or poltergeists, and when they are, they're usually a side effect of that hellmouth or a portal is open somewhere else and ghosts have come through, except for obviously the most probably thematically ghost heavy episode, which is Conversations with Dead People.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just looking up here. Apparently, I Only Have Eyes for You is listed as being a poltergeist episode.
Which one's that?
It's the episode in season 2 after Angel has been Angelist, where the two lovers are trapped in a school. It's a teacher and a student, and they keep playing out their trauma and their death.
That is distinctly a ghost episode, but I think that's unusual for that fact.
It is. It's just, I can't wait to get to that episode because Angel taking on the feminine character in that scene is such a great moment. And Where the Wild Things Are, which is where the episode where Buffy and Riley fuck a whole house into death, basically. Remember that one?
And there's a very responsible shot from the network of, even though she's in the throes of this like mystical compulsion, she still reaches for a condom.
Oh yeah,
very clear insert. Yeah.
And apparently there's a Angel episode called Room with a View, which is season 1 episode 5. But it's actually it's spelled ORM space W/A space VU.
Yeah, because it meant to be in the style of a advertisement you put in a newspaper where you have to be short on characters. And I think is that not the one where he finds the ghost in the hotel?
I think it might be. It's the one where Cordelia is trying to find a place to live.
Oh yeah, she lives with a ghost.
Oh, she does live with a ghost.
Yeah,
that's the one where
the ghost comes from. Yeah, he's walled up by his mother and
he has a name, doesn't he?
It's like Billy or something.
Yeah,
it's really generic. Anyway, back to this actual episode that we're watching. So Xander continues to be a creep watch.
Okay.
He says that if he was invisible, he would use his powers to guard the girls' locker room.
Yeah.
Which was very, in the last couple of years was aped in an episode of Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where they run into a character who's like, hey, it's summer camp in the 80s. Let's peep on the girls' locker room and do all this kind of, hijinks. And you're like, oh yeah, cool, that's fun. And it's like, oh wait, you're just a pervert. This is perverted what you're doing. This is sexual assault, essentially.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, there's a lot of this, like even when Mitch is in the shower, like the guys come in, it's like, hey Mitch, you're gonna be hanging on Cordelia's arm. He's like, that's not all I'm gonna be hanging on. You'll see you later at the milkshake shop.
Yeah, whoever wrote that scene has never heard an actual human person speak.
Never spoken to a woman.
No, absolutely. Actually, I know. I was trying to think. For a second there, when we were in that scene in the locker room, I was like, "Is this the locker room that appears elsewhere in the show?" I think it is, because the boys' locker room doesn't appear too often. The girls' one does. It has much more divided rows.
Yeah,
you can't see over the rows, if you get me. Whereas the boys' one does seem to be more open plan. The boys' one, I think, appears in the swimming episode where the swimmers turn into reptiles.
Yeah, specifically
with Wentworth Miller,
who is in Prison Break.
Yeah, and he's a big gay.
Yeah, so the girls' locker room does come up quite a lot more often. And again, we have a recurrence to this theme of anytime any adult shows any kind of affection for the teens, they become a threat.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Miller, who Cordelia seems to actually genuinely been trying to study with or get some kind of like improve her grades with. And as soon as she was like, oh yeah, definitely Cordelia, really good work, come see me after class, like, well, she's going to get attacked. Yeah. And then she survives, but she nearly gets choked to death by Invisible Girl.
I think probably Cordelia is quite a good student, even though she's, Cordelia. I think there's a couple of references to her doing quite well in school and being quite engaged. So this actually might have just been an example of that. And also Willow and Xander are taking the piss out of her in the past for when they went on a 6th grade trip and she was too try-hardy or something. Yeah,
there's definitely an implication that they used to know each other maybe just a little bit more, and then she became this like classic popular girl kind of archetype.
That was a kind of sad scene where Buffy was being excluded from their like childhood memories, and it was like another moment of exclusion for Buffy. So the topic of exclusion and isolation being pretty important in this episode.
Well, Buffy in many ways doesn't have a past. Like Buffy Summers' life runs from 16 to 23, it
really does,
and that's what defines her. And this, in all seriousness, there's something to be said about how difficult it can be to not have those roots and not have, Buffy obviously doesn't have any family here, any aunts and uncles or cousins, doesn't have any childhood memories. That's part of what kind of could push her to isolate herself as a Slayer, and why it's a strength of hers that she actually forms a new family here instead.
It's kind of sad. The only real childhood memories they ever refer to for Buffy are when she's there are two parts. I think there's one where she's talking about where she's really sick in the hospital and she's talking about her friend who died. Remember that?
Oh God, yeah.
Who got killed by like a clown person?
No, it was a German thing. It was the Kindertote or something, the child killer. But it was something that comes in. It's a classic mythological concept of a wraith or a witch that comes in night and sticks on your chest and suffocates you.
And the other thing,
that was her cousin actually. I think
it was her cousin. Yeah. And the other references that to her child are almost all through Dawn, who of course those are all transplanted memories. They don't exist.
Yeah, Dawn will be an interesting one to look at, because even though I watched Buffy, there was a part of me, one of these classic mistakes I made in my life, where it's like, the guy just missed the fact that Buffy had a sister.
You see, I didn't realize that Buffy didn't have a sister, because I started watching it maybe halfway through season 4. So when we got to the Dawn part, I was just like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I think we'll appreciate it a lot more, like watching it and knowing that's what's happening, because I think it is definitely done.
Yeah.
But because we weren't paying attention to some degree or watching it chronologically, it's like, oh, she's a sister. That's confusing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, I've watched it through a couple of times since then, but yeah.
Oh, I know. I just mean like in terms of we can examine that feeling when we're looking at it. Yeah, no, absolutely. So some of Cordelia's stronger moments in this episode are where she gets crowned May Queen, which looks like quite an unimpressive ceremony, because it's just on a box in the front yard of the school. And she says, "Thank you for making the right choice and showing that you love me. Being popular is not just my right, it's my responsibility." And that's just kind of unbrazen confidence that she has is kind of very very endearing.
Yeah, no, it's so great. I'm so glad that there's a Cordelia-centric episode in this season. And, like, I think this is a more Cordelia-centric episode than the Willow
episode. Absolutely,
yeah.
You're 100% right.
Like, you get more, like, character development for Cordelia than Willow did in her Willow episode, which I think was really rude.
Like, if you were putting together a collection which was, like, Buffy the Cordelia episodes, this would merit it, whereas that Willow one would be a rip-off.
Yeah, it'd feel awkward. I think they just haven't realised how great Alison Hannigan is yet, to be honest.
So one of the kind of key mystery points in this episode is that they realize that no one knew who Marcy was, because in her yearbook everyone wrote "Have a great summer," and Giles is like, I don't get what the point of this is, and they're like, it's the kiss of death. Have a great summer is what you write if you have nothing else to say. And Buffy says to Willow and Xander, "Did you know her?" And they're like, "No, we never met her." And she's like, "Well, that's weird because you wrote it too." And it was actually it was that moment like, oh, awkward.
Yeah, it really reminded me of that scene in Simpsons where Lisa hands her yearbook around the like around the kids to like have them all sign it. And I remember like watching it originally and her like passing it. And I was like, that's weird. They keep passing it along, but they don't seem to be writing in it. And it gets back to her and she opens it. There's nothing written in there because they just pass along. They didn't give a shit. Yeah. And it really reminded me of that scene.
That
really
stuff,
sad.
as you well know, that stuff really gets me. Like that touches me somewhere deep. You know?
Is this why no one came to my birthday?
Yeah, the epitome being Nelson and Simpsons, which is meant to be a joke, but which always upset me when people talk about him being mean. And he says, "Oh, is this why no one came to my birthday party?" And it's just...
It's not good.
It just gets me every time. So there's a class, a category of moments in TV that are like this, and this Have a Nice Summer thing is definitely one of them.
Yeah, it's not good. Is Marcy super strong?
Yeah, it's odd. People are often strong in Buffy for plot reasons, and I think what they're trying to convey is that she's getting the drop on Buffy because she's invisible. So that's how she's managing to
She manages to pull Cordelia up through a fucking vent in the ceiling.
She does. That is true. Maybe she just has crazy girl strength.
Yeah, maybe. Where did she get all that fucking medical equipment?
Yeah, I thought there might be a scene where they at least waved and was like, "Oh, she stole the doctor's office stuff." But yeah, she just has some local anesthetic that can numb Cordelia's face, so she can in quite a horrific scene says she's going to give her a face that the children would dream about and no one will ever forget seeing the May Queen again. Like that's good horror. That's good horror.
It was good. Yeah. It was good. I
remember that scene. Do you know what I mean?
There was something like there was a little bit of like gayness there, and that might be me just reading the character because Clea Duvall is.
Please do.
Clea Duvall is gay, but she's one of those great actors who's taken on lots of gay roles on the basis of being gay. I love that. Like she was in But I'm a Cheerleader. She was in. I was going to say she's in Girl Interrupted, but I'm not sure if she is gay in that.
American Horror Story.
Veep. She's just in lots of things where she's gay, which is great. But in this, she says your beautiful face, and she calls Cordelia's friends a bunch of sluts.
She does, yeah.
Which read to me kind of a little bit like maybe she
charged.
It was charged, so there's like that judgment of, and like she definitely does want to be friends with Cordelia and seems to idolize her a little bit in her flashbacks, her awful sepia blown out flashbacks.
Overexposed, yeah.
Which never happens again, thankfully.
No, but whenever they portray anything that's like out of the current mind state, it's often just that they've overexposed it 1,000 times.
Yeah, for sure. Also, did you notice that when at some point she's talking to Cordelia and Harmony, and they turn and they look straight at the camera, which is meant to indicate they're looking at her? It was awful. I hated it so much.
No, I didn't see that. That sounds terrible.
It was awful. But yeah, so that kind of obsession with Cordelia a little bit, I thought could suggest that she might be a little bit of a gayer.
Could be, yeah. And there's definitely, like, if anyone's going to have the theme of being ignored in high school and not fitting in, like, that's a gay theme, you know, it's something that's relatable to. Did I mention anything about Harmony in the comics in the last episode?
About how she...
I said it to you yesterday, but I don't know if I said it in the comics. I'll say it very briefly, that according to the expanded universe continuity, Harmony Kendall is the oldest creature who survives in the Buffy universe. She survives after everyone else dies in the end of days, and she becomes the soothsayer, essentially. This is the chronicler of history, which is very funny, very wild concept.
Because everyone ignores her, right?
To a certain degree. Again, she ends up being that character where no one tries to hunt her down and kill her, because people are like, oh yeah, Harmony Kendall was a person. And it's also what happens to her in the show in some ways. Like, she dies.
And no one notices.
And no one really notices that she dies. And then later on, they're like, oh yeah, what happened to you? And she's like, I died. I'm a vampire now. I'm like, oh, how have you been? Great.
Yeah, she does. She get like you can see her getting felled in the season 3 finale. Actually,
yeah. Oh, I'm very excited for season 3 finale. That's
season 3 is great.
It's gonna be ripe.
I read a list of Joss Whedon's top 10 favorite episodes of the show, and none of the episodes were from season 3, which I thought was weird because he included an episode of season 7, which was Conversations with Dead People, which I just doesn't warrant being on top 10 of anything.
People do generally think Conversations with Dead People is a good episode.
Actually, speaking of season 7, there is a moment in season 7 where Buffy's trying to get everything sorted around when weird shit's happening because of the Hellmouth, and it's becoming Hellmouthy again under the school, where she has to she sees a girl going partially invisible, and she's like, I can see you, stop that. Yeah. Which is a direct reference to this, obviously.
Yeah.
Oh, a couple of other things. One, another moment where someone turns invisible. Buffy in season 6, of course, when she gets the haircut. Do you remember this?
No.
She gets a haircut, she goes invisible, and...
is it a really bad haircut?
No, it's nice, it's short. And we'll get to that. Cordelia refers to the Twinkie defense in this episode.
Yeah, which I think is a topical American thing that I've never quite grokked.
Okay, so the Twinkie defense is Harvey Milk. His killer, Harvey Milk being the famous gay San Francisco mayor from the 70s, who his killer, basically when he was put on trial, said, oh, well, I, was influenced by having eaten too many Twinkies, which are sugary and made my chemicals go out of whack in my brain. And so I can't be held accountable. And he got away with it. So the Twinkie defense is basically a piss take defense.
But that seems adjacent to the gay panic defense.
Oh, it's absolutely. Oh, that was gay panic was also a major element in that episode, in that whole case as well.
And actually, if anyone's not familiar, just very briefly, with the gay panic defense, it's a defense that's been made in situations where people have killed gay people homophobically, essentially, which has been successful in certain cases, where people have said, I was so shocked at the idea of a man coming onto me, I had a moment of temporary insanity and panic. And
I can never remember if Matthew Shepard's killers actually got arraigned in the end, but if they did, they certainly employed the gay panic defense anyway.
Yeah, which is NG. No good.
No good at all. Did you notice that Bronze had a sign outside saying closed for fumigation, which obviously Marcy put up to stop people coming in to interrupt her mutilation of these two girls? How did you get them there? A.
Yeah, and it's also... Sorry, go ahead.
Are people going to believe that there's another fumigation that happened like 3 episodes ago?
Yeah, twice. Like fumigating twice in one season.
Yeah,
so unrealistic. Cordelia also makes a reference to Buffy, when were you popular in some kind of alternate universe? And Cordelia specifically, in the episode The Wish, brings them to an alternate universe where Buffy never came to Sunnydale.
Yeah, good point.
So again, I don't think any of these things are foreshadowing, but I think when he's writing the later episodes, he's like, oh yeah, remember that thing. Like it's foreshadowing.
Yeah, kind
of. Which is what foreshadowing literally means. So I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, no, foreshadowing usually means that you have a plan and you refer to that plan earlier on, whereas this is basically writing back to.
Yeah. Backshadowing.
Backshadowing. Or traditionally referred to as shadowing.
Shadowing.
Okay, so we close with that scene, the awful weird scene with the FBI having taken Marcy away and her being included in a school for assassins, which was very uncomfortable because there's a book that says it's assassination and infiltration. It's basically, and Marcy's like, cool.
Go and learn how to be a spy.
Yeah, but the text of the book is really mangled lyrics of Happiness is a Warm Gun by the Beatles.
Yeah, so this is another victim of people at the time being like, no one's ever going to see this text. It's too small. It's on a television.
Yeah.
DVDs will never be invented. So
exactly.
Let's put whatever crap in there we want.
It was awful. It was shocking.
The one that we always refer to is in the first season of Next Generation. In the back of the set, where they didn't think anyone could see, they put big black pieces of cardboard up against the screens when they weren't using them to keep the glare down, but it's quite clearly they've just put cardboard on the back of the set.
Now my favourite one from Star Trek is...
You always reference this.
Is Denise Crosby. Is that right?
Yeah.
Denise Crosby. So, what's her name?
Tasha Yar.
When her last episode that she filmed, which was not the last episode of the season, which she reminded a Star Trek producer very aggressively of on Twitter. Recently, yeah. It was really good. But she, basically in the last episode she filmed, she was standing there and they were walking through a bunch of doors away from her. And in the very far distance, you can see her jumping up and down and waving at the camera as it's her last shot. Like,
so even on the Blu-ray DVDs we have now, you have to know it's there and look for it to see her waving. But essentially on screen, she waves goodbye to the TV show. And it's very obvious once you know where it is. It's quite funny.
Did you think the crush, kill, destroy line was a Lost in Space reference?
Yeah, I can. Now that you've said that to me, I can see this is when Buffy says that monsters are just crush, kill, destroy. Taking the pop culture milieu that they would be having right in this episode. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
So there's a lot of that, I think, call back to kind of genre fiction, and the thing is very much the things people grew up watching before they wrote Buffy. Naturally weaves its way into this. Actually, but before I forget to mention some brief appearances, but Principal Snyder has some good characterization in this episode as well. He's like, Deg students in this school, that's ridiculous, that hasn't happened this week.
Yeah.
And he gets really worried with the idea of people suing the school, and he starts to earn his survival essentially in the show.
He's great in this episode. I loved him. Okay, well, are we ready to we don't have much to do at the end of the episode. There's no kill count. There's no Giles didn't get knocked out.
No.
Any stray observations you have?
The only bad fashion I remember, or I noticed, was Xander's wearing a jumper at one point where he has 2 blue stripes over his elbows, like 2 thick blue stripes, and then another orange one around his waist.
Okay, it's actually a blue stripe on one arm, a green stripe on the other arm, and an orange one in the middle. So it's a black jumper with 3 different coloured bands on it. It was horrific.
Who was dressing this kid?
Who is dressing him? Fuck's sake.
And Harmony just has some green ribbons just threaded through her hair.
Oh, also, Harmony's wearing a t-shirt at the very beginning with the young girl cat from the Aristocats on it, which is another Disney reference in this show. There's been lots of Disney references so far.
Here you go. So,
and there's a very heavy Disney reference throughout Once More Feeling. So
that's true. So overall, what are your impressions of this episode?
Nah. Don't care.
Okay.
Apparently, they did a poll at some point where they were trying to figure out what characters to bring back for season 8 for the comics. Mm-hmm. And Marcy Ross featured very heavily in the voting for it. She did great.
I suppose earlier episodes of Buffy are more prone to doing these unfinished stories, these loose ends. What happened to the invisible girl who became an assassin? That's because Buffy and Joss Whedon is very prone to always weaving these things back in later on, either with a one-off joke or with bringing people back as recurring villains. So I can see why, if you're a Buffy fanatic, is there a word for that, Buffy fans?
I don't know. No, I don't think so.
Okay, there you go. I can see why you want to bring her back. But yeah, no, overall my impression was, again, fun concept episode. Some surprising depth there in terms of Buffy, and definitely Cordelia's portrayal, I think, stands up in the look back. But yeah, popcorn episode, not much to it. Saving space for us to get to the big finale next week, which will be Prophecy Girl. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be us finish season 1 of
weird.
This, and also of Buffy Boys, which is actually quite exciting and quite cool.
And then we're never going to do it again after that.
No, this, you want to be one of those things where people still 15 years later are saying they really should make more seasons of Buffy Boys, rather than saying it ran for 15 seasons and we all hate it now.
Exactly, cut it off while it's going good.
Yeah. So if we're going to we're going to stick to our integrity, you're going to write down our score.
Okay, I have it written down.
Okay, I'm going to write it down. Cheers, moin. Okay, I'm good to go.
Okay, so I'm going to... Oh, fuck, I have to give it... I have to remember. Okay, I'm going to give it...
I'll go first, will I? So I'm going to give this 6.1 warm guns.
Oh, very good.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give it 6.0 slut friends out of 10.
Is this the closest we've been while not being antagonistic to each
other?
I
think so, yeah.
That's good. Okay. Does that mean it's going well, or just we're getting homogenous in our opinions?
Homogenous, we have no personality otherwise. What I'll say is I don't agree with women calling each other sluts.
No, this is not a slut shaming podcast.
Unless it's in a very affectionate way.
Mm-hmm. Which I don't think we're allowed to do.
No, I don't think so.
I think it'd be weird if I called you a slut.
You probably shouldn't.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't. Okay, so that's this week's episode of Buffy Boys. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
This has been a weird experience filming 2 episodes back to back, essentially. So
I'm in my pajamas.
I'm also in my pajamas. And there's no Chinese afterwards, so I don't even know why we bothered to do this. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. The one thing, my call to action for this week, one thing you could do to help us out here is say to one person you know, hey, you know that podcast Brian and Joel are doing? It's actually not as bad as you might have expected it would be. Give it a listen. And I think that's the highest praise you can get. That is not as cringeworthy as you were expecting. So please do that. I really appreciate it. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, yeah, join us next week for the season finale of season 1 of Buffy and the season finale of Buffy Boys. Yeah.
One of the other podcasts I've been keeping an eye on that started up recently of Buffy, and they're in like Los Angeles or something. But the audio quality is really bad, like worse than us early on, which was really bad. But also, for like a couple of weeks ago in mid-January, they were like, oh, don't worry, we're going to be posting it in the next episode tomorrow, promise. And then they were like, oh, don't worry, we're going to be posting it next week, we promise. We just forgot to hit upload. And they just haven't posted anything since. And I was like, And that's why no one came to our podcast party. Yeah, okay. You're setting us up for a fail here. I sure am, yep. Okay, see you next week. Thank you. Oh, what's our fans' names? Buffy Boys fans? Buffy Boys? I think I said Buffy Boyos. Buffy Boyos? Boyos, yeah. That seems a bit gendered. I suppose our podcast is called Buffy Boys. There's a gender implication anyway. Mm-hmm. Okay, see you next week, Buffy Boyos. See ya, Buffy Boyos. Oh, Buffy Boys. Bye.